You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. This is Telling It Like It Is, and today we have a special edition looking back at the stories making the headlines in 2013. With me is the broadcaster and journalist James Delingpole and the former Kremlin advisor and editor of StirringTrouble.internationally.com, Alexander Nekrassov. The hostage crisis in Algeria in January. Alexander, there were Algerian forces, they mounted a rescue operation, but it didn't end particularly well.
Well, it's not that. The issue is that Libya became a total mess as a result of the invasion by the West. They call it a no-fly zone, saving innocent civilians, but basically they turned the country into a jihadist-controlled state, and it started to supply weapons and manpower to all those jihadist groups, and as a result we had the attack on the BP-owned petrochemical plant in Algiers. And that just proves again the UN and Western powers should not be allowed to meddle in other people's affairs.
And it certainly showed, James, that Al-Qaeda, the new front for Al-Qaeda, is a part of the world that we don't actually know that much about.
Yeah, I think this is a further evidence of the so-called Arab Spring mutating into the Islamist winter. We were sold a pup by David Cameron, by Barack Obama, etc. The idea that by lending our aircraft and materiel to this campaign to overthrow these supposed dictatorships in the Middle East, we were therefore going to be creating this wonderful, rosy new world where people would be liberated. The exact opposite's happened. In almost every case, Islamist regimes have taken over and deposed reasonably Western-friendly ones. And I think what we saw in Algeria, the hostage is there, in Mali, weaponry has got into the wrong hands. I think the region is out of control.
Former cycling champion Lance Armstrong finally confessed to what most people had known for years. He confessed to using performance-enhancing drugs throughout his career. He won the Tour de France 7 times. James, were you disappointed when you finally found out that his record was tarnished?
I was particularly disappointed for my uncle's sake, because in my uncle's apartment in Devon, a holiday apartment, he's got a framed yellow jersey belonging to Lance Armstrong, which I imagine is completely worthless now, and he probably paid a lot of money for it originally. Isn't it extraordinary that he managed to get away with it for so long, using the libel laws, bullying, blustering, and it took a very brave journalist, a handful of journalists, I think, to expose this charlatan. Nevertheless, I'm not defending Armstrong in the slightest, but I do wonder whether it's time we completely change the rules of sporting events so that anything goes, so that we create these kind of cyborg creatures where they can take any performance-enhancing drugs they like. Because it seems to me that it is entirely random which ones get through the system, which ones pass the allegedly stringent testing, and which ones get away with it. It's how do we know that anyone?
Because it's pharmaceutical companies competing with each other,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at the Olympics lineup for 100 meters, or 200 meters, or 400 meters. These guys, look at them. I mean, they're an advert for performance-enhancing drugs. Well, okay, some of them. For people to say, well, how dare he did that? He was caught, okay. Are you going to tell me that the other cyclists who do the Tour de France, they're completely free of any substances?
I think. I hope you're not maligning the great Sir Bradley Wiggins.
Bradley's clean.
He's clean. But wouldn't it be fun if we had a separate Olympics where you could take anything you like, and imagine that the records would be broken?
It'd be a level playing field in a
and
funny
the
kind of way.
sponsorship would be marvelous. Can you imagine?
It'd be like
the
F1.
Colombian drug cartel.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. This is Telling It Like It Is, and today we have a special edition looking back at the stories making the headlines in 2013. In February, Pope Benedict the 16th held his final public address. He shocked everybody when he said he would be resigning his post for health reasons. He's the first pope to do so since 1415. James?
The story I heard was that the Vatican was so riddled with corruption and financial scandals and skullduggery that Pope Benedict did not feel up to the job of dealing with this.
Well, what about his successor? Pope Francis took up the post and was named Times Person of the Year.
The point about the popes, you see, they're not supposed to stand down. So when he stood down, it was a shock for all the Catholics because, the previous pope before him, he just lasted until he died, and he was not really feeling well for most of the time. So that was quite a shock. But yes, according to what I've heard, there were so many problems with corruption that supposedly Pope Benedict just thought, no, I can't handle this. And he just walked away. Technically, we have two popes at the moment, and they actually sometimes meet and talk. And that is confusing for Catholics, you see, because they prefer one to be dead, and in a good way. And
it's happened before, though, Alexander. There has been the Pope and the anti-Pope, and there was the Pope at Avignon and the Pope at
Well,
Rome.
There's also the Black Pope. He's called the Black Pope, who is the head of the
President
Jesuits.
Obama is the current Black. Is that right?
not exactly.
Formerly Nelson Mandela.
The Black Pope is actually the head of the Jesuits. But Pope Francis is a Jesuit, so we might assume that he's the only Pope now. The problem with this Pope is that when he says he likes that he's there for the poor, he's forgetting that he's there for everyone. That the rich rich too, and that message, the middle classes, for example, in Western Europe, they don't understand that. What do you mean, just the poor? What about us?
I agree. It's much harder because, after all, the rich they find it more difficult to get into heaven than the camel through the eye of a needle. So it's much tougher on the rich.
Some people can do that.
Well, it's harder to get a horse through the eye of a needle, and in fact, the horse meat scandal flared up in February. It seems like a long time ago now, but horse lasagna. If you want cheap food, don't be too surprised, James.
Total non-scandal. If you go to France, Italy, horse meat is considered a luxury. It's got a sweetness that the natives find quite attractive. I think over here we are congenitally disposed towards not eating horse meat because we like riding horses, we like hunting with them. Where is the scandal? I think it was this was created as a sort of propaganda exercise by the European Union to show, look, we are protecting you from this
horrible,
dangerous, deadly
terrible,
horse meat.
We're always told, Alexander, to watch what we eat. Who knew that at the races we were literally doing that?
This was a distraction. You see, people were complaining that there were too many preservatives in all foods. And suddenly we have this huge scandal, supposedly, that we have horse meat. I think that what people eat now is junk. What the grocery supermarkets are saying, buy ready-made meals, don't cook at home, which is absolute rubbish. You should cook at home.
Moving on to March, and this was a year where some key world figures died. In March, Venezuela's president, Hugo Chavez, the scourge of the United States of America, died. James, is that a significant passing? What do you think?
I think we're well rid of the guy. He was like Ken Livingstone in South America, wasn't he? Or you get these leftist demagogues who essentially rape their country's economy and kill the productive sector, nationalise industries. I don't think that he's left his country in a better place. Do you,
Alexander? He was quite friendly with Moscow, wasn't he?
Well, he was friendly with Moscow, but in a strange way, because he came over and always begged for arms, at low cost. And Moscow was not really very happy with him because he made all sorts of weird statements, and he did like Fidel Castro and his brother a lot. And by the way, he practically died there in Cuba. By the way, proving again that even the medical sector in Venezuela just disintegrated. But he was a colorful guy, he could stir up a crowd, which, for example, no politician can do in Britain apart from maybe George Galloway.
Where does this put the red wave in Latin America, James?
I was just thinking that one thing, actually, I think his country will thank him for is that he repatriated his gold reserves. And I think when it all kicks off, when the world economy goes up the chute, I think Venezuela will be grateful for that.
It'll be less reliant on its oil reserves, and energy was a big story this year in April. In fact, the British government planned to offer money, other benefits to rural communities to persuade them not to oppose fracking. James, this of course is the controversial gas extraction technique. Where do you stand on the fracking debate?
I love the way that this adjective, controversial, is always applied to fracking.
Not controversial.
It's only controversial in the eyes of organisations like the BBC and the Guardian and the Independent. Actually, there have been hundreds of thousands of fracks if not millions of fracks in the USA. This stuff about water contamination, it is not been. There has been no proven case where water's been contaminated. Essentially, there is a very, very well funded campaign by various left-leaning activist groups to try and close down the fracking industry. Why do they want to do it? Well, partly it's because of their obsession with renewables. They want to big up wind power and solar power, none of which could possibly compete with the cheap gas that's produced by fracking. Fracking has transformed the American energy economy. American gas prices are a third of what they are in Europe. We need fracking over here for energy independence. We need it for our economy's sake.
And Alexander, if we do have it, we won't need Russian gas anymore.
No, I don't think that will be substantial enough. I think that Europe is stuck with Russian gas because it's high quality. Fracking will not provide enough gas for Britain. Fracking is not that, James says it's not dangerous. It is dangerous because there have been earthquakes in Texas where they overdid it. To be honest, I think that all these companies that do the fracking, they should invest more money into electric engines and electric power, because it is outrageous that in the 21st century we still have most of the vehicles with an engine, fitted with an engine developed in the 19th century, guys. The basic internal combustion was developed in the 19th century. We still have it. And I bet you, James, oil companies have those inventions hidden in their safes, and they're not allowing them to be developed because they told me, the big boys of oil business told me, we have another 50 years when we're going to use oil and gas. There's no way we're going to allow anybody to invent a really, really effective electric engine. So there you have it.
I agree with you, Alexander, that the energy market is totally rigged by big corporations and governments. I'll give you that. I think you're talking absolute rubbish about earthquakes.
I never talk rubbish. I'm a former Kremlin advisor.
I
can't talk rubbish.
These so-called earthquakes are almost immeasurable earth tremors, which are not the same as earthquakes. We're not talking San Francisco being riven in two here. But I agree with you about the energy market. And in Britain, certainly, I think it is an absolute disgrace. It is a conspiracy by the three main political parties against the poor energy user. We are being driven into fuel poverty by their ludicrous green measures.
So you're saying vote UKIP or something? I don't understand the message.
UKIP
you are a member of UKIP, aren't you?
Yeah. UKIP is the only party with a sensible energy policy, which is an extraordinary indictment.
Which is what?
Well, I think they would very happily scrap every wind turbine in the country. Right. They'd scrap solar power. They'd frack, baby, frack.
Okay.
Now, also that month in April, and we'll be touching on UKIP in a minute when we talk about the local elections, but Theresa May, the Home Secretary, announced new plans to try to deport the extremist preacher Abu Qatada from the UK. He was a thorn in the side of the British government for some time. He has now, of course, left the country. Alexander...
It was embarrassing that you can't actually deport a man accused of terrorist charges, and he just stays on and on and on, and it's all about his human rights and so on. I thought it actually was a farce, in a sense, because, you get people kicked out for nothing, but basically for small offenses, and then suddenly you get a huge suspected terrorist or whatever, and they can't do anything with it. One of the main, by the way, duties and jobs of a government is to provide security to its people. And if the government cannot deport a terrorist, then this government is hopeless.
He actually left of his own accord in a funny kind of way, didn't he, James?
I just think the whole business was absolutely scandalous. Here was a Jordanian with no British connections. So we not only gave him shelter, but he sponged off our welfare system. Ordinary British people look at our justice system and they ask themselves, how can it be right that we give all these rights to these terrorist fomenters of terrorist activity? What kind of world do we live in? We're actually funding
James, you
these
live
people.
in a society which is obsessed with human rights in inverted commas. That's the problem.
I don't know how human rights lawyers can sleep at night. I really don't.
Well, I think they sleep well.
Human rights lawyers and bankers, I really think...
I thought you liked bankers. Come on.
Banksters? No, I don't like bankers.
Banksters, of course. Speaking of terrorism, the Boston Marathon was the unlikely target for a terrorist attack.
Amazing, wasn't it? That when they announced that the two brothers were Chechens, I think it was the most amazing terrorist attack ever to take place in America. And the biggest thing about it is that these two brothers grew up in America. They went to Chechnya, supposedly, one of them.
Yeah.
But you can't really say that they were, radicalized and then moved in and so on. I still can't figure out what was driving them. I think that they were brainwashed by somebody inside America, and I think they did it just for kicks.
Have we had adequate explanations for what happened?
Well, no, and am I right in thinking that Russian intelligence had warned the Americans that these guys were dangerous? I suppose they're what you call almost lily whites, aren't they? People because they've got white skin, they're European looking. People imagine that they seem to be. They gave the appearance of being reasonably well assimilated, but this is the problem.
But the most amazing thing of all, they put up a fight with armed police and were fighting with them for a while. And I thought, all these films about those cops, all those SWAT and so on, going in, bravery and so on. And here were one was a kid actually, and he put up a fight and actually killed somebody. And these cops, all armed to their teeth, hundreds of them. And these two were just, giving them a hard time.
Well, you're not saying that they're kind of heroes, are you? Look,
I'm not saying they're heroes. I'm just surprised that trigger-happy cops in America suddenly found themselves on the defensive. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I think if you're fighting people who are prepared to die, we found this in the last war, fighting the Japanese, for example. It's very, very difficult to
what do you mean we found? You say as if you took part. What do you mean we found?
I know. Actually, it's a good point, Alexander. I do believe the Russians also took part in the Second World War.
Well, the Russians, by the way, finished off the Japanese army. Well, when your boys were resting.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. Staying in the United States, there's been more than one atrocity carried out by somebody with a gun, and President Obama really made it a key plank of his policy to try to get stronger gun controls, but he seems to have failed.
I'll tell you why he failed. Because way back, President Clinton allowed children as young as 8 to be given Prozac. So imagine this. You have violent computer games, you have violent television, and you have a daddy's gun at home, right? And you missed a Prozac or two. And you've been playing, I don't know, Tour of Duty or something where you whack everybody for 24 hours. So having missed those tablets and you have a gun, what do? Well, you go out and shoot somebody.
James, after the Dunblane massacre, stricter gun legislation was brought in, had an immediate impact. It seems impossible a similar thing can happen in the United States.
Look, I take the opposite view. Every time there is a high school massacre, as seems to be the Americans won't every few months, there are calls from the liberal left to control guns. Actually, I think it's a sign that there should be less gun control, not more gun control. I think if people on those campuses had carry licenses, I think that they would be able to nip these attacks in the bud. I think it's written into the Constitution, as we know, the right to bear arms, and I think actually it's a very good check and balance against dangerous governments like President Obama's. And I also like to think that the reason that Obama has not been successful in increasing gun control is thanks to the visceral hatred America has for Piers Morgan, who is, after all, has been campaigning. Once Piers Morgan lent his name to the campaign against guns, I think the campaign against guns was doomed.
That's Piers Morgan. Speaking of prominent Britons, Margaret Thatcher died in April. James.
He wept. I bet you he wept. Did you weep? Come on, say it.
Margaret Thatcher was certainly the greatest post-war Prime Minister. She was magnificent. All the more magnificent, I think, because she showed the Conservatives how much a genuinely radical Conservative Prime Minister can achieve. None of these panty-waist liberals like David Cameron and Ted Heath and Harold Macmillan. Well, I think Martin Durkin put it very well on his excellent documentary, Death of a Revolutionary. She was a working-class revolutionary. The reason she was so popular and successful, she galvanised not just the middle classes, but also the working classes, people who wanted to own their own home. She encouraged the nation's aspirations. I think she was brilliant.
But widely disliked as well in big swathes of the country, Alexander.
Well, I tell you something. I met her several times. I've interviewed her several times, and I met her when she was ousted. I remember she was crying. It was some Russian exhibition. I came up to her and said, I called her Prime Minister.
You made her cry?
No, she was crying because somebody asked her about, what happened, and I knew actually that she was going down because I knew about the conspirators, those meetings at the home of Biffin and others when they were plotting against her. Well, I couldn't say it to her, can I? The reason why they liked her is because she was not part of the establishment. I mean, the people who liked her. The reason why she was not liked is because her privatization program, although some say it was wonderful, it was not all wonderful. There were problems, railroads and others, water privatization. We're now seeing the problems with it.
We are indeed.
Yes, so there were problems. But my personal opinion of her is that she was surrounded by midgets, some of them,
pygmies.
who were plotting pygmies.
Political pygmies,
Yes,
not
political
literal ones.
pygmies,
Right.
who were plotting against her in a sense that they didn't fit into the government. And that's why she was supposed to fall at some point. Poll tax had nothing to do with it. I don't know who is inventing this, that this was the nail in her coffin. It was used, yes, against her.
Yeah.
And she certainly knew how to win elections, and somebody who won an election in Iran, the Islamic Republic, was Rouhani. This was after Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's tenure as president ended. There has been some kind of rapprochement, one could say, between Tehran and the US. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's overstating it, Alexander?
There will never be good relations between America and Iran. America would always be wanting to get rid of the current regime and get somebody else installed against them. What I find amazing is that Iran attacked somebody last time in 442 BC. America, which has been waging wars in the past 50 years, probably all the time, is saying this is a dangerous country. Iran wants to have a bomb, not because it wants to bomb somebody, because it wants to protect itself after what happened with Iraq and many other countries, Libya as well and others, Syria at the time. What I find amazing is this huge campaign saying Iran should not have a bomb. Iran is basically in a situation when it has to have one.
I think you're overdoing slightly the innocence of Iran there.
Yeah.
Look, who was it who was essentially providing the technology for all the IEDs killing the troops in Afghanistan? Who is it who funds Hezbollah? Iran is a fomenter of terrorism. Just because it is not engaging in overt military action against the West, it's certainly engaging in lots of covert military action.
Well, covert military action, America does it everywhere. Because, excuse me, every time there's a crisis, the president quietly signs an order, executive order, allowing the CIA to conduct a covert operation on the territories of independent countries. You can't compare Iran to America. America is the aggressor, always.
I'm not going to defend the Obama administration here in the slightest.
Well, you started. There was a hint of it.
You can be against Iran without.
He's sending more drones
yes,
than George Bush.
There have been foreign policy disasters aplenty under President Obama, and I'm amazed that he got the Nobel Peace Prize.
No, that was fair. That was fair. Yes, I like it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Other things happening in May, the United Kingdom Independence Party claimed, well, at least its leader, Nigel Farage, claimed that there was a sea change in British politics after it made gains. It did very well, and as a member of UKIP, you must have been very pleased.
This is just the beginning. There's going to be an even bigger bloodbath at the European elections.
Yeah, who cares about those elections?
No,
James, nobody cares about the European Parliament. No one. That's why you're going to win it.
Listen, I was about
Try winning a seat in the Commons. Try winning one seat. Seat in the Commons.
Excuse me, Mr. Knee-jerk anti-UKIP. I was about to make that point.
Oh, I see.
It doesn't really matter who we have as our MEPs. Nevertheless, what it's going to do is it's going to cause shockwaves throughout the Conservative Party.
Oh, of course it will.
For me, it doesn't really bother me that probably UKIP are not going to pick up many, if any, seats in the 2015 elections.
Which matter?
What does matter is the galvanising effect it is going to have on this notionally conservative, David Cameron's Conservative Party. I think it might give them some backbone. It might encourage them to adopt some conservative policies for a change. And if they don't, they are going to be toast. Ed Miliband, useless as he is going to clean up in 2015.
No chance at all. None. Because Cameron will win. Strangely enough, Lib Dems will be there, the remnants, because UKIP by then will disintegrate. And I think that the notion that you elect people into parliament who will get, 120 grand plus expenses, who will then work against that same parliament or that same EU which is paying them. It is such a naive assumption that it's like If
You're
you
so
went,
cynical, aren't
can
you?
you imagine if UKIP went and won a lot of seats in the Mongolian parliament? Now, would it rock the British establishment? No. It's the same thing with the Euro Parliament. Nobody cares in Britain who is there in Europe. Nobody watches what they do, discuss.
Yeah, but Alexander, unlike you, I've hung out among the UKIP faithful.
Well, I bet you did.
And I've realised that these guys are serious. They're not going to just be going to go back to the Conservative Party just because David Cameron has said a few vaguely anti-European things in between all the pro-European things he says elsewhere, depending on who he's speaking to. They're really angry. They want change, and unfortunately, or well, fortunately, in fact, they are going to derail the Conservative vote. They're going to split the vote in 2015, which means that Ed Miliband is going to get in.
Yeah, but there's no Conservative vote left. That's why some Labour Party people and supporters will vote for Cameron. That's the amazing thing. That's what nobody knows. I know because I'm a professional.
Speaking of big political stories, that brings us to June and the announcement that England's protected species, the badger, would be culled. This is a story that's been rumbling on over the last few months, and the badger cull appears to have failed, James.
Yeah. Alexander, I know, claims he doesn't care about the badgers.
No, I care about the badgers in a good way, but in a good way.
In a bleeding heart, ignorant animal rights way.
No.
The badger
You don't kill animals for fun. I mean, not for fun, but for some allegedly that they spread tuberculosis and so on.
TB and cattle. Mm-hmm.
This is just typical distracting people from real issues. And suddenly they go after badgers.
No.
Why do they choose? Why did they select badgers, by the way?
Alexander,
you tell me, James.
Alexander is flaunting his ignorance here. Owen Paterson, the Environment Secretary, one of the few good ministers in this disastrous administration, holds the record for the most questions tabled in Parliament on any subject ever. He asked over 500 questions, all of them about badgers. This guy knows badgers. He kept badgers as a child. He's studied.
This is sick.
He's
You're
studied
asking
what's going.
500 questions about badgers.
Let me finish.
While
Mr.
children go
Nekrassov,
poor in Britain, and 2 million pensioners can't get enough money to feed themselves.
Karen, James.
Dairy farmers around Britain are having their herds devastated by TB. The reason that their herds have been devastated by TB is that badgers are acting as the carrier. And the reason badgers are acting as the carrier is that badger populations have exploded. They are out of control.
So
what you have when you have an excess of badgers is sick badgers. They need culling. This has been proved effective when concerted culls have taken place in America, for example. They have found that the incidence of TB has decreased drastically, and the problem is that the animal rights protesters have been interfering with the cull, and that is the reason that the cull has failed, not because of the cull in itself is a bad idea.
They're not just innocent little animals, are they, Alexander? They're pests, and they destroy
Pests?
Yeah, they destroy
Who's
livestock.
pests?
Well, that's what they say. That's what the evidence says.
You're confusing them with rats, don't you? No. I think that, first of all, let me tell you something. People have lost it completely, the idea that they are in charge of animals. You see, we are the czars of the animal world. We should be careful what we do with them. But look what we are doing. More and more of the species are disappearing completely. Will never come back. Why? Because we're interfering.
That was part one of our roundup of 2013 with Telling It Like It Is, looking at the stories making the headlines as discussed by the broadcaster James Delingpole and the former Kremlin advisor Alexander Nekrassov.